On the morning of May 5, 1994, in the heat and humidity of Singapore, an 18-year-old American sits alone inside a prison cell. His name is Michael Fay. In a few minutes, he will be escorted into a room where he'll be strapped down and beaten with a rattan cane, a punishment so severe it will trigger outrage across the globe. Outside the prison walls, cameras are already waiting. Inside government offices, diplomats scramble. And in Washington, the President of the United States is personally trying to stop what's about to happen. Singapore refuses. If you don't understand how brutal caning in Singapore really is, we've already broken it down in detail in a previous video that you can watch. But how did a teenager who had just turned 18 go from a late-night prank to the center of an international crisis? And how did Singapore hold its ground, even under pressure from the world's most powerful country? This is the story of the day Singapore defied the United States. Michael Fay wasn't a hardened criminal. He was a teenager from Ohio sent to Singapore to live with his mother and attend the Singapore American School. But in September 1993, Singapore was suddenly hit by a string of late-night vandalism attacks. Not random chaos, but coordinated mischief. Cars parked in residential neighborhoods were targeted. Some were spray-painted. Others had eggs thrown at them. A few were scratched, dented, or had parts like badges and mirrors damaged or removed. According to police investigations, this was not driven by politics or protest. It was driven by boredom and thrill-seeking. A small group of teenagers, mostly sons of expatriates, were roaming the streets at night looking for excitement, testing limits in a country known for having very few. By early October, police had identified a pattern. On October 6, 1993, officers laid an ambush near a suspected target. In the early hours of the morning, they moved in, chasing down a car carrying several youths. 2 teenagers were arrested on the spot. Under questioning, they began naming others involved. One name immediately stood out: Michael Fay. Police acted immediately. Within hours, officers moved to search his home. What they found went far beyond spray paint: a haul of stolen public property, including street signs, flags, and even a telephone booth. Michael and several other expatriate teens were soon facing a long list of charges for vandalism, mischief, and theft. In total, Michael was accused of 53 offenses, ranging from spray painting cars to stealing road signs. In Singapore, vandalism isn't a mere youthful prank, it's a serious crime. A 1966 law, known as the Vandalism Act, mandates caning or flogging with a cane. A law was originally passed to crack down on political graffiti. This meant that if found guilty, Michael was all but guaranteed to face corporal punishment. Under the advice of his lawyers, the 18-year-old pleaded guilty to several of the charges in hopes of receiving leniency, but it didn't help. On March 3, 1994, a Singapore court sentenced Michael Fay to 4 months in jail, a fine of 3,500 Singapore dollars, and 6 strokes of the cane. The caning, essentially state-administered flogging, was the part that made headlines around the globe. Singaporean courts regularly order canings for crimes like drug trafficking, rioting, even overstaying visas, but this was believed to be the first time an American citizen would suffer this medieval-seeming fate. Michael's fate was sealed when his appeal was rejected on March 31st by Singapore's Chief Justice, who upheld the punishment in full. The stage was set for a collision between Singapore's uncompromising law and America's outrage. Many Americans were stunned that an 18-year-old could face caning for vandalism. Major U.S. media outlets sharply criticized Singapore's justice system, calling the punishment archaic and barbaric. Reports explaining how caning was carried out quickly spread across television and newspapers. Very quickly, the case stopped being just a crime story. It was reframed as something bigger, a clash between East and West, between Asian discipline and what critics called Western decadence. In Washington, the Clinton administration was officially appalled. While acknowledging Singapore's legal right to punish crimes, U.S. officials argued that caning was excessive for a non-violent offense. President Bill Clinton publicly called the punishment extreme and a mistake. The U.S. Embassy in Singapore warned that Michael could be left with permanent scars, even though the vandalism he committed caused no permanent damage. As the date of the caning neared, Clinton took the extraordinary step of personally intervening. He even sent a personal letter to Singapore's president, Ong Teng Cheong, pleading for clemency and asking that the caning be called off. Around 24 U.S. senators signed a similar appeal. Singapore's response? A polite but resolute, a simple no. The Singaporean government stood firm, defending its sovereign right to enforce its laws within its borders. borders. Officials bristled at what they saw as foreign interference and condescension. Singapore's Ministry of Home Affairs pointedly remarked that it was Singapore's tough laws that kept the country safe and orderly, unlike cities like New York, where even police cars are not spared the acts of vandals. And Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's founding father and elder statesman, was characteristically blunt. He declared on national TV that the United States was neither safe nor peaceful because it did not dare to restrain or punish those who did wrong. Then, in a line aimed squarely at the West, Lee added, "If you like it this way, that is your problem, but that is not the path we choose." To be fair, Singapore wasn't completely deaf to the diplomatic noise. Behind closed doors, quiet conversations did take place, and after weeks of pressure from Washington, Singapore finally offered an olive branch, but a very small one. On May 4th, 1994, just one day before the caning was scheduled, the government announced that Michael Fay's sentence would be reduced from 6 strokes to 4. Officials said the decision was made out of consideration for President Clinton and in recognition of the close U.S.-Singapore relationship. The message was clear: we hear you, but the caning is still happening. Singapore would show restraint. It would not back down. And with that, the countdown to the final and painful chapter began. On May 5, 1994, Michael Fay's lawyers visited him in prison to deliver the news. The appeal for clemency had been rejected, but he'd been granted a token reduction in strokes. Michael was grateful for any mercy. He even asked his lawyers to thank President Clinton and President Ong for considering his case. But nothing could change the reality that he now faced. He is resigned to the caning, one of his attorneys told a throng of reporters, describing the 18-year-old as nervous but accepting. That very afternoon, Michael Fay was caned. In the aftermath, Singapore officials reported that Michael remained stoic. They said he even shook hands with the caning officer afterward and insisted on walking back to his cell unaided, determined to show resilience. Years later, Michael would admit that during the caning, he screamed, "I'm dying," but in that moment, he tried his best to keep his dignity. In Washington, Vice President Al Gore said the United States was disappointed, but it was time to move on. In Singapore, Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong declared the matter closed. The diplomatic clash had peaked, and neither side wanted it to damage the broader relationship. Meanwhile, back in the US, public opinion remained divided. Newspapers received waves of letters supporting Singapore's decision, and polls showed Americans were nearly evenly split on the punishment. For Fay, the end of his Singapore saga was only the beginning of a long personal aftermath. After serving about 83 days in jail, he was released early for good behavior and returned to the United States on June 21, 1994, stepping into an intense media storm. In interviews, he described the caning in stark terms, noting that the real pain didn't start until a few hours later, and spoke openly about the scars it left behind. He also made a controversial claim that his confession had been coerced by police threats and that he never actually vandalized any cars, insisting he had only stolen street signs. These assertions kept the story alive in the press long after the punishment ended. Fay struggled to rebuild his life in the States. He later admitted to substance abuse, saying that sniffing butane helped him forget what happened in Singapore. In the years that followed, he faced several legal troubles, including arrests related to drug possession. Today, Michael Fay is in his late 40s, working as a casino manager in the United States, far removed from prison cells, television cameras, and diplomatic standoffs. In the end, the caning of Michael Fay became one of the most controversial moments in Singapore-US relations. It was a rare moment when a small nation resisted pressure from a superpower and stood by its laws. The case ignited a global debate about crime, punishment, and the divide between cultural values.